Hey guys, my name's Taz. Bucket list tick off today as I test ride the Royal Enfield Bullet Classic 500. I've just been left behind by the ride, so I've just got to catch up quickly. This is a great bike. I've wanted to ride one for years. I was on this test ride, you left me behind. Right, now I'm on the ride. This is the Army Green or Battle Green Classic 500. It's a nod to the 800 bikes that the Indian Army bought from England that set off the chain reaction of events that led to Royal Enfield ceasing to be a British bike company and starting to be a Indian bike company. This bike is absolutely a dream to ride for me. In Australia it's treated as a bit of a toy, but in other parts of the world, particularly India, it's treated like a deity and it's worshipped. And I've always wanted to ride one, and I've got no prejudice towards Indian bikes at all, having owned the KTM Duke 390, which was an amazing bike. So I have every expectation that this will be a great ride. It's pretty simply appointed. It's just got the speedo. It's got a fuel light that tells you that when you've got about 100 kilometers left. Engine check light. That's about it, apart from the ignition. The mirrors are a little bit Mickey Mouse. They stick up, and there's a lot of talk about the vibration of Royal Enfields, but this one has been run in. It's got about 2,300 kilometers on it, and the vibrations are minimal, to say the least. It's flickable, it's light, handles pretty well. It's actually a little bit taller than what I expected. I've owned and ridden classic bikes previously, and they were always a little bit smaller than a modern road bike, but this is actually quite tall, particularly because I'm 165 centimeters, so it does actually feel quite tall. It's a little bit of a stretch to the ground, but because it's a single, it's a narrow waist and you can get your feet on the ground pretty easily. There is a lowering seat, and I would possibly look at that if I was going to purchase one, because it takes the springs out of the seat and it potentially prevents some of that pogo effect that you might get with springs under the seat on the standard Classic 500. The seat itself is actually quite comfortable. It's a very comfortable bike to ride. It seems absolutely at home in these 80 kilometre speed limit zones. This is actually the Old Coast Road between Ulverston and Penguin. It's one of my favourite roads in the state. Absolutely gorgeous view, and really enjoying being on it on this Classic 500. So the bike itself doesn't look much on a spec sheet. It's got 27 horsepower, 43 newton meters of torque. This is not a spec sheet bike. This is a bike that you need to get out onto the road and experience, because ultimately it's so much more, in my opinion, than what the spec sheet would suggest. It handles remarkably well. It's got a fair shove. Bottom line is that with that much torque from the 500 single, in the lower revs it's got quite a shunt. It's not a quick bike by any stretch. It's probably one of the slowest bikes on the market at the moment, but it is much more rideable than what the spec sheet would probably suggest. It's a retro looking bike, but it's almost a classic in its own right. Royal Enfield have been manufacturing motorcycles since 1901, which is a couple of years longer than Triumph and Harley. And one of the great ironies of this test ride today is that it's on a Harley demo day, and ultimately Royal Enfields are actually outselling Harley Davidson in certain parts of the market. They're also probably got a greater cult following in certain parts of the market than Harley Davidson, and the sound of the Dug 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 of that 500 single is probably more iconic in most markets than something like Harley Davidson. So it is a bit ironic that I'm following a group of Harleys to test ride this great little bike. So the switchgear, it's pretty standard. Feels exactly like what was on the KTM Duke 390. It's very simple, it's very purposeful. It's of equal quality to any of the cheaper Japanese bikes. It's very similar to my wife's CBR 500R. The mirrors I'm not a huge fan of. They're very stalky. I can certainly see out of them. But if I was to buy this bike, I'd probably look to get some bar-end mirrors fairly quickly, just in keeping with the look of the bike. There's always a lot of talk about vibration with Royal Enfields, and this bike is actually surprisingly little in its vibration. I was expecting it to be a lot worse, and I've had an XS1, which is an XS650, and that vibrated terribly. I've had a 69 Harley XLCH Sportster, and that vibrated terribly. So I'm used to riding bikes that do vibrate, and this actually was far under the expectation I had from all the fanfare that you get on the internet. A lot of those bikes are not run-in. They're demonstrators with a few kilometres on it. This one's got a couple of thousand kilometres on it, and I'd say that the vibration is actually negligible. No more, no less than a lot of the other bikes I've ridden. As I flicker the bike around, one thing I'm pretty conscious of is that it's got non-folding foot pegs, and ultimately that's a little bit dangerous. You wouldn't want to touch down a foot peg, because without them having a folding mechanism, it'll start to want to pivot around that foot peg and lift the back wheel off the ground. So that is one thing that one would have to be very conscious of on a Bullet or a Classic 500, and it'd be something that I'd potentially look long term to change, see if there's aftermarket. We're coming through Penguin, beautiful little seaside Tasmanian town on Bass Strait on a glorious day. We're test riding this bike as part of the Northwest Motorcycle Show at the Ulverston Rowing Club. And I'd hazard a guess to say we're going to turn left here, and we're going to head out up the slip lane onto the highway and into a 110 speed limit zone, which will be great. It'll give me a chance to feel the performance of the bike and feel the vibration of the bike in the upper rev range. Suspension's good, soft. It's only adjustable for preload on the back. It's a simple bike. It's a utilitarian bike. And these Harleys that I'm riding with, they've got huge amounts of torque. And at this point, sort of just at cruising, the bike is certainly not being overshadowed, but I hazard a guess to say if they twisted the throttle, they would leave me for dead. So at 80 kilometres, the bike feels real at home at 80 kilometres. Up on to 100. Still no real feeling of vibration, no tingly fingers, numbness in the feet or hands. There's a lot of talk about not using the Royal Enfield for highway riding, and actually it doesn't seem to be too bad at all. I don't know if I'd ride across the country on it, but for short stints on the highway I certainly don't see a problem with it. This is quite a steep hill. GoPro probably won't do it justice, but it's quite a steep hill. And we're in a 110 zone, which in Tasmania is the fastest speed limit zones we have. So the torque of the Harleys are pulled away from me up the hill, which is no surprise. They're probably 1600cc and I'm 500cc single. So we're sitting on 110 pretty easily here. You can see a little bit of vibration through the mirrors, but nothing extraordinary. Bike tracks really well. It's about 180 odd kilo wet. It's heavy enough to track really nicely. It's quite confidence inspiring. I actually feel that it's not bad on the highway, to be honest. Love that exhaust note. The single makes a beautiful sound, and I can see why the Indians really worship that dug 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 noise. Easily just loping along the highway. This is the 2018 Euro 4. So it's got ABS with a disc brake on the front, and with the Euro 4 it's now got ABS and a disc brake on the back, and they are more than adequate for the size bike. It does not feel under-braked at all. I think it's 18-inch back wheel, 19-inch front wheel, and that's keeping the bike tracking quite nicely. Just love the retro look. These bikes hold the record for the longest continuously produced motorcycles in history. They've barely changed since the 50s. With that said, up until about 2008, they were pre-unit construction with a separate gearbox and motor. This is a UCE, a unit construction engine, but it is certainly in keeping with the spirit of the historic Royal Enfields. That's about the only thing that's changed, along with the disc brakes, just to keep it safe, keep it compliant. I'd hazard a guess to say that the exhaust that's on it to make it compliant is quite restricted and heavy, and it is very quiet. It's actually quieter than what I suspected it. So another modification you'd look at if you purchased a Royal Enfield would be to give that a flick and get a more open exhaust, and it might give you a little bit more punch, and it'd certainly give you more of that characteristic dug 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 sound that they're famous for. So just a quick stint up over the legal limit. What the bike sort of lacks is roll-on performance. It doesn't seem to have any problem in sitting at 110, 120 plus which is right up in the upper end of the rev range, but you don't get a lot of roll-on power. Like from there, you wouldn't really be able to overtake. So again, it's cool for cruising on the freeway or the highway, but once you're up to speed, keeping up with traffic at this speed, you wouldn't be able to just drop a gear and disappear like you could on a modern Japanese 4-cylinder or something like that. So you've just got to bear that in mind. It's the art of riding slowly. It's not a performance bike. Who is this bike for? I think it's pretty much for anyone. It's LAMS approved, so in Australia you can use it on a restricted license. It is fairly heavy, so it may not be the best bike to learn on, but certainly it's very easy to ride. It's for lovers of classic bikes, retro bike lovers, people that want to feel the 50s and 60s but don't want the hassle and the unreliability of a genuine classic motorcycle. People that want the sort of fueling and reliability of a modern bike but the looks of an old bike, and this bike just ticks those boxes in spades. People coming back to motorcycling, people that gave it away in their 20s and are coming back to motorcycling when they're retired, that want to relive their youth, that this bike would absolutely suit that down to a T. This bike, while it's not a cafe racer per se, but it would certainly fit into that scene. And on a recent trip to Melbourne, I saw dozens of them in the city and they looked fantastic. So hipsters would love this bike. Not that that's a bad thing, I don't have anything against that. Whatever gets people on two wheels and riding. This bike is just perfect for anyone who wants a simple, efficient, economical and relatively cheap motorcycle. What it's not is a crotch rocket. So if you're after a 300km/h bike, this is not for you. If you're into lazy backroad cruising, Sunday afternoon in the sun fun, this is the bike for you, and you will get miles of smiles to the gallon. Yeah, it's a great bike. Would I own one? Absolutely. So as we pull in, as the Royal Enfield twins come out, they strike me as being a lot more Triumph, whereas the classic 500 singles strike me as being more Royal Enfield. It's been a great bike. It's been, as I said, a bucket list tick off. I've really enjoyed riding this bike, and I'll be sorry to give it back. I'd like to take it out for the rest of the day. So thanks to Tasmanian Motorcycle Warehouse for organising the test ride for me and bringing the bike down to the Ulverston Rowing Club so that I could test ride it. Guys, my name's iRoad Taz. I am out.